Before I share my story, I want to ask you something. Stay with me until the end. What I'm about to reveal is not just a confession, it is a wound that never fully closed. If you've ever given everything for someone and wondered if they would do the same for you, then my voice will echo inside your chest. Listen closely, because behind every sacrifice there is a truth we don't dare to speak. The beeping of the heart monitor should have been a sound of safety, a rhythm that promised order and attention. But that night it pierced me like a reminder that I was still alive when I almost wished I wasn't. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed, pale and cold, washing the room in a colorless glow that made everything look like it was already halfway to death. I lay there, in Santa Helena General Hospital, room 407B, staring at the cracks in the ceiling paint, when the doctor entered with the clipboard in his hands. His steps were slow, his eyes too careful, and I knew before he spoke that something had been broken open. He closed the door softly behind him, sat on the chair beside my bed, and said my name as though he had been practicing how to break glass without making noise. Then he told me. He told me my treatment had been altered. The medications I depended on had been suspended, doses reduced, and priorities changed. He lifted the clipboard and turned it toward me, and my stomach twisted before my eyes even focused on the page. The signature was my son's. The slanted handwriting, the loop in the L that dipped too low, the flourish in the final S that I had seen on birthday cards, on school projects, on 100 notes taped to the refrigerator. And beneath it, the authorization line with a new name, the name of the patient who now carried my treatment as if it were hers. When I saw it, the sound in the room dropped away. It was not just a stranger. It was her, Camilla Rocha, the woman I had noticed at Christmas 2022, laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his sleeve with her hand like she owned him, his lover, his mistress, the woman he chose over me. I felt the world tilt. My hand on the blanket didn't look like my hand anymore. The skin thin and wrinkled, the veins like wires pulled too tight, the fingers trembling without my permission. I remembered June 1989, when I held him for the first time, his tiny body barely 3 kilos, his hair sticking up in wild tufts. I remembered the second-hand stroller I bought in 1992 for 45 reais on Rua Teodoro Sampaio, pushing him under the rain while my sandals slipped on the wet pavement. I remembered every office I scrubbed on Avenida Paulista before sunrise, leaving home at 5:10 with coins rattling in a jar labeled rent, my hands smelling of bleach and lemon long before most of the city woke. I remembered skipping meet so he could have soccer boots, tightening my belt so many times I added new holes with a nail, and handing over the last bills of the month for his English lessons because he wanted to speak like movie stars. Those sacrifices lay inside me like bricks, stacked until my body sagged, and all of them crashed down at once when I saw her name written where mine should have been. The doctor explained my blood sugar had spiked to 268 that afternoon, that the chest pressure was not coincidence. He said I had legal options, that he needed to ask if I felt safe. I almost laughed, but no sound came out. Safe? What safer place was there supposed to be than in the care of my only son? Yet my mouth was dry with the taste of metal, and my throat tightened with a question I couldn't speak. He left the clipboard with me and excused himself, closing the door gently. When the room emptied, I pulled the board closer, my hands shaking like they used to on nights when I had to decide which bill could wait. His name stared back at me in black ink, dark and undeniable. Lucas. And beneath it, authorization for Camilla Rocha, born 1991, bed 409A. He had pressed harder on the date, August 17, 2025, as though even the paper needed to remember his betrayal. Memory is cruel because it rearranges itself after the fact, and suddenly every overlooked sign sharpened in my mind. The phone he started keeping face down on the table since March. The pharmacy runs that stretched until after midnight. The way he talked about my test results like they were optional. How in May he told me the hospital charged 80 reais for socks with rubber grips, and I handed him the money only to have the nurse give me a free pair later. How in July he insisted we cut back my insulin because he read something online about dependency, And when I objected, he asked, softly but sharp, "Do you not trust me?" And I, foolish, afraid to be ungrateful in my own illness, swallowed my protest. I told myself it was stress. I told myself love bends. I told myself lies. At 7:19 that night, my phone vibrated on the tray table. A message from him. "How are you feeling?" No question mark. His contact photo glared at me. Him on the beach last summer, arms slung around me. Our smiles too bright. Like the sun had bleached away the truth. I typed fine, erased it. I typed come, erased it. I finally wrote, "I need to see you now." 3 dots pulsed. Then his reply, 10 minutes. Another message followed. "A lot of confusion here today. They might ask you to sign some clarifications. It will be easier if you just say I handled it." That word, handled, slid into me like a knife. I had handled everything for decades so he wouldn't feel the weight. Selling my wedding ring in 2010 for $280 to pay his university fee. Taking an overnight bus in 2014 to clean a house in Ribeirão Preto for $200 extra. Bleeding blisters into my socks. In 2018, covering his lapsed insurance with 480 reais, lying to him that it was a loyalty discount. I handled it. Always me. And now he wanted me to handle this. The door opened. His cologne reached me first, woody, expensive, one I had smelled on him only recently. He came in with a polished smile that didn't touch his eyes, kissed my forehead lightly, sat at the edge of my bed. He wore a pale shirt, sleeves rolled, hair neat, jaw clean. He said, "Mai, there's been a mix-up." His gaze avoided the clipboard on my lap. I told him sit. He tapped his foot twice, a childhood tell whenever he rehearsed excuses. I asked if he knew Camilla was on the 4th floor. He blinked once, slow. He said, "She has no one." I said, "She has you." The words burned. He sighed, mask slipping for a second. He said she needed it more. He said my levels were fine. He said it was temporary. He said I was strong. My strength turned into currency I never approved him to spend. I placed the clipboard on his knees. He looked at his own name like it had been forged, but it was his. He said, "I'll fix it." I said, "You'll undo it." That's different. He nodded, eyes glassy but not breaking. He said, "I'm sorry," in that hollow tone that can mean everything or nothing depending on the day. I watched the clock tick to 7:38. A siren wailed outside, the world busy with its emergencies, while mine sat neatly dressed at the foot of my hospital bed, rehearsing apologies like lines from a script. Under the harsh light of that room, with the clipboard still resting on his knees, I felt as if the walls themselves were listening. My chest rose heavy, not just with the effort of breathing, but with decades of memories pressing down on me. He sat there, my son, the boy I once held against my shoulder, and all I could see was the man who had bartered my pain away like a cheap coin. He shifted, restless, glancing at the door as though escape was an option, but I would not let him leave me with half-spoken apologies and flimsy excuses. Not this time. I asked him straight, my voice low but steady, when did she become more important than me? His jaw tightened, a flicker in his eyes, and then he said words I never thought would leave his mouth. "You wouldn't understand." My heart clenched harder than any illness had ever made it. I had scrubbed floors, cooked cheap meals from scraps, sewed torn shoes back together so he could walk without shame, and now he dared to tell me I wouldn't understand. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands for a moment. Then he whispered, "She saved me." I almost laughed bitterly because if she saved him, then who was I all those years when he was drowning in bills and failures? Who held him through his first heartbreak in 2008, when he came home drunk at 20, crying over a girl named Anna? Who pulled him out of bed in 2015 after he lost his job and lay there for days? Curtains closed, smelling of sweat and cigarettes. It wasn't Camilla. It was me. Always me. I reminded him of those years, my voice trembling but sharp. He didn't meet my eyes. He muttered about loneliness, about mistakes, about how Camilla understood him in ways I couldn't. The betrayal rolled in waves, each sentence heavier than the last. I felt sick, Not just in body, but in soul. He spoke of her like she was oxygen, and me, his mother, like I was stale air that suffocated him. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady beep of the monitor, and I realized I had become background noise in his life, the sound he could tune out. The nurse returned with fresh saline, her eyes flicking between us, sensing the tension like static in the air. Lucas straightened, put on his smile again, but his hand trembled when he took his phone from his pocket. I caught a glimpse of her name glowing on the screen before he flipped it face down. Camilla. The letters burned in me like acid. The nurse left quietly, and I asked him, "Was it her idea? Did she ask you to take my medications? Or did you decide on your own?" He froze, lips parting, but no sound came. The truth was clear in his silence. She hadn't just received my treatment, she had asked for it, and he had given it. I closed my eyes and let the years roll over me. December 2010, when I sold my wedding ring for his future. March 2014, when my feet blistered from scrubbing houses so he could pay his debts. November 2018, when I lied about discounts so he wouldn't see my exhaustion. And now, August 2025, lying in a hospital bed stripped of the very medicine that kept me alive, because he had decided I was strong enough to endure, and she wasn't. That was his equation. My sacrifice, her comfort. My endurance, her salvation. He tried again, reaching for my hand, saying, "Mai, please, don't make this bigger than it is." My hand recoiled before I could stop it. Don't make this bigger? He had gambled with my life, with the fragile balance of chemicals in my blood, and he wanted me to minimize it the way I had minimized his failures all his life. My chest tightened, tears burned but didn't fall. I said, "You were supposed to protect me. That's all I ever wanted from you. Not money, not praise, just protection when my body became weak." His lips quivered, but instead of answering, he whispered, "She's pregnant." The world shattered in that single word. Pregnant. The reason. The impossible request behind every small lie, every half-truth, every shift of my chart. He had stolen my treatment to safeguard her pregnancy. He said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage, as though speed could soften the blow. His voice trembled as he added, "I couldn't let her lose it. Not after what happened last year." My head spun, fragments of thought colliding. He had chosen to gamble with my failing body to save the life of the child of his mistress. The air thickened, my ears rang, and the monitor beeped faster. I wanted to scream, to tear the IV from my arm, to demand the whole hospital hear what he had done, but the scream lodged in my chest and became a hollow ache. My sacrifice had always been for him, and now he was sacrificing me for her, for a future child whose existence was built on lies. I stared at him, at the man I had raised, and I no longer recognized him. The boy I once kissed goodnight had disappeared, replaced by someone who calculated survival like a businessman, trading me for the promise of her womb. My hand pressed to my chest as I whispered, "You've killed me already, Lucas." He shook his head, desperate, saying, "No, mine. You're strong. You'll make it through, I swear." I wanted to ask him how many times he thought I could survive without the very medicine that kept my heart beating. I wanted to tell him that strength isn't an endless well. But my voice gave out, replaced by the steady hum of betrayal louder than any machine in the room. And in that silence, I began to understand that love, once twisted by manipulation, becomes a noose you tighten with your own hands. I had raised him on sacrifice, and he had learned the lesson too well, so well that he believed sacrificing me was acceptable, natural, inevitable. The night stretched long after he confessed, and I felt the weight of years pressing down in ways I had never allowed myself to feel before. The room was filled with the antiseptic smell of disinfectant, the buzzing of the fluorescent tube, and the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the corridor. But inside, everything was louder, my heart racing against the steady beep of the monitor, my breath uneven, and the sound of my son's words replaying, twisting into new shapes each time. Pregnant. It echoed like a curse, a justification he thought would soften the blow, when in reality it shattered whatever pieces of trust were left between us. I could see it so clearly now, all the little manipulations dressed as care. How he persuaded me to skip doses. How he insisted I didn't need as much medicine. How he turned every hesitation of mine into an accusation of mistrust. And I had fallen for it because I wanted to believe in him more than I wanted to believe in my own survival. That realization tasted bitterer than any pill I had ever swallowed. He had learned from me not only resilience, but also how easily I excused betrayal if it came wrapped in love. I turned my head to the window where the city lights blurred through the glass. São Paulo pulsed beyond those walls, indifferent, alive with its millions of strangers who carried their own secrets. Somewhere out there, Camilla lay in bed 409A, cocooned by the medicine meant for me, her body receiving what mine had been denied. I wondered if she knew. Did she lie there, grateful, believing Lucas had fought for her life, unaware, or maybe fully aware, that he had stolen mine to pay for it? The thought chilled me deeper than the air conditioner blowing stale cold against my skin. I remembered the December of 2021, when he first mentioned her name casually, like she was a colleague, just a friend who needed help with a project. I had brushed it off then, even when I noticed how his phone lit up more often, his smile softer when he read her messages. By Christmas 2022, the truth was already blooming in front of me like an open wound. She had come to our house, bringing a bottle of wine I couldn't afford, laughing too freely, her hand brushing his arm in ways no friend ever should. That night, when I caught them exchanging glances across the table, I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself he wouldn't, he couldn't, but I had been blind willingly, the way mothers sometimes are, preferring the comfort of ignorance over the sting of betrayal. Now lying in that hospital bed, all illusions stripped away, I felt a rage rise inside me, not the explosive kind, but the slow-burning fire that warms bones until they ache. My sacrifices had not just been wasted, they had been weaponized against me. Every coin I saved, every hour I worked past exhaustion, every lie I told myself that it was worth it, had all become part of the foundation that allowed him to betray me without hesitation. He tried to speak again, but I raised my hand and cut him off. For the first time in years, my voice was sharp, steel against his velvet excuses. I asked him what he planned to tell me when I died. Would he stand by my coffin and say, "She was strong. She could handle it"? Would he hide behind that word the way he always had? His face crumpled, his lips trembling, but I could see he still didn't regret enough. His guilt was heavy, yes, but not heavy enough to crush his loyalty to her. That loyalty outweighed blood, outweighed the years of sacrifices he had once praised me for. The nurse entered again at 10:15, her eyes darting between us, her hands steady as she checked the IV line. She knew something had unraveled. She didn't need words. The silence was thick enough to suffocate anyone who entered. She placed a chart at the foot of the bed, scribbled quickly, and when she left, the door clicked in a way that sounded final. It was then that I realized I wasn't just fighting for my health anymore. I was fighting for the dignity of being seen as more than a stepping stone in his new life. I thought of the years when dignity was all I had. In 1998, when I worked 3 shifts cleaning bathrooms for a company that paid me 380 Rs a month, I still ironed his school uniform until it looked brand new. In 2006, when I borrowed $500 from a neighbor to buy his computer for university, I paid it back in installments, ashamed but determined. In 2017, when he came home with debt collectors calling, I negotiated with men who smelled of cigarettes and fear, offering them $300 here, $200 there, until they left us alone. Each time I swallowed my pride, but I kept my dignity, telling myself it was for him, and now he stripped that away in the most intimate place of all, my own hospital bed. He leaned closer, whispering that he would make it right, that once Camilla stabilized, he would switch the medications back, as though my life could be paused, as though I could be placed on a shelf like a book, waiting until someone decided to pick me up again. I told him, with a calm I didn't know I possessed, that a pause could still mean death, that sometimes a single dose missed was enough to tip the balance forever. He didn't answer. He looked away, guilt swimming in his eyes but not yet drowning him. In that moment, I knew the years of sacrifice had chained me, not freed me. I had raised him to believe love meant giving everything, and he had twisted it into believing he had the right to take everything. And yet, even with that knowledge burning in my chest, part of me still ached for the boy I once knew, the boy who cried when he lost his toy car in 1995, who clung to my skirt on the first day of school, who whispered goodnight with sleepy eyes. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who now calculated my worth against hers and found me expendable. I turned away from him, my eyes on the ceiling, whispering to myself more than to him, "Love should never cost your life." The words floated in the sterile air, unacknowledged, but they were the truest thing I had ever said. The corridor outside my room was restless with distant voices, the squeak of wheels against the linoleum floor, and the occasional burst of static from a nurse's radio, but inside the walls of 407B, time was suspended. Lucas remained seated at the foot of my bed, staring at the clipboard as though it might erase itself if he looked long enough. His silence was thick, his guilt a fog that clung to every corner. Yet still, I could see in his eyes the stubborn defense of a man convinced his betrayal was noble. He wanted me to believe this theft of my treatment was an act of mercy, that he had done it for love. But love that requires sacrificing one life for another is not love. It is manipulation dressed as devotion. I asked him if she knew. My voice trembled, but my words carried the weight of a verdict. Did Camilla know that her strength was borrowed from me, that her safety came at the cost of mine? He hesitated, jaw tightening, and finally muttered, "She didn't ask for this." But the way he looked away told me otherwise. Maybe she didn't sign the form, maybe she didn't hold the pen, but she had whispered, had pleaded, had let him carry out the betrayal while she closed her eyes. My son had been her accomplice, and I had been their sacrifice. Memories flashed of the times I taught him the difference between right and wrong. In 1997, when he was caught stealing candy from a corner shop, I marched him back, made him return it, made him apologize. He had cried, cheeks red with shame, promising never again. In 2003, when he lied about skipping school, I sat with him for hours, explaining that truth is the only currency that doesn't lose value. He nodded then, too young to know how easy it would be to forget. I thought I was shaping him into a man of integrity. Instead, I had created someone who knew how to mask dishonor with gentle words. The nurse checked my IV at 11:03, eyes flicking nervously toward Lucas. I caught her expression, that subtle tightening around the mouth, the professional mask slipping. She knew something was wrong, but she also knew the weight of silence in families. When she left, the room felt heavier. Lucas leaned forward, his hands gripping the rails of my bed. He whispered, "You can't understand what it's like to feel helpless, to feel like you'll lose everything." My chest ached at his blindness. Did he forget the years when I had nothing but still carved a path for him? Did he forget the hunger I swallowed so he could eat, the exhaustion I buried so he could rest, the loneliness I endured so he would never feel abandoned? I had lived helplessness. I had lived loss. And yet, I had never sacrificed him for my survival. I told him so, each word slicing through the sterile air. I said, "You think this is about love, but it's about power. You took mine away to give it to her. You decided who deserved to live stronger, and you chose her over me." His eyes filled with tears, but he shook his head violently, insisting, "I did it because I love her, because she's carrying my child." The words landed like stones in my chest. "My child," he said, as though I wasn't still here, as though I hadn't carried him for 9 months, as though my body hadn't once been the vessel that gave him life. The irony struck me so cruelly I almost laughed. I had given him life, only for him to gamble mine away to protect the life of another. Generations folded into betrayal. Mother sacrificed for son sacrificing mother for unborn child. Was this the legacy of love? A cycle of giving until you vanished? I closed my eyes, and my mind wandered to the winter of 2012, when I worked double shifts to pay his tuition. The cold seeped through cracked windows, my hands raw from detergent, my stomach hollow. I remember telling myself, this is temporary. One day he will thank me. One day, he will protect me the way I protected him. That day never came. Instead, here I was, shivering under thin hospital sheets, learning that gratitude can rot into entitlement, that protection can turn into exploitation. Lucas begged me then, his voice cracking. He said, "Please, Mai, don't tell anyone. If they find out, I could lose everything." My lips parted, but no words came. He feared his own downfall more than my death. That was the truth laid bare. The weight of his request settled on me like cement. For decades, I had carried his burdens, shielded him from the consequences of his mistakes, covered his lies. And now, once again, he wanted me to protect him, to die silently so he could live comfortably. I thought of all the impossible requests over the years. In 2009, when he asked me to co-sign a loan I knew he couldn't repay. In 2015, when he begged me to cover a debt from a failed business venture. In 2018, when he pleaded with me to hide his unemployment from his father. Each time I had said yes, telling myself it was the last time. But this request was different. This was no longer about money, reputation, or pride. This was about my pulse, my breath, my survival. And still, he dared to ask. The monitor beeped steadily, a cruel reminder that my life was measured in electrical signals, fragile and finite. I whispered to him, "You are asking me to die for you." His face twisted, tears spilling, but he didn't deny it. That silence was louder than any confession. The rage inside me finally burned hotter than the fear. I told him he had taken from me the one thing I could never replace. Not medicine, not money, trust. And trust, once broken, does not heal like bone. It shatters into fragments that cut deeper every time you try to hold them. He lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking, but I felt no sympathy. For the first time, I let the anger breathe, let it live outside of me instead of burying it under excuses. The clock struck midnight, the hum of the hospital quieter, as though the building itself was listening. I stared at him, the boy I had raised, the man who betrayed me, and I realized this was the moment my motherhood ended. I had given him everything, and now I had nothing left to give. The hours after midnight were the longest I had ever lived. The hospital seemed to quiet itself into a graveyard of whispers, machines humming like muted prayers, and the distant footsteps of nurses patrolling corridors that smelled of alcohol and despair. Lucas remained in the chair by my bed, his face half hidden by his hands, a grown man shrinking into the posture of a scolded child. But I didn't see a child anymore. I saw a man who had placed a price tag on my life, and the cost had been too cheap to protect. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of his signature on that clipboard returned, as if branded into the inside of my eyelids. Lucas Oliveira, my son, the ink of betrayal. I thought of the way he used to sign his homework when he was 10, pressing too hard on the page so that the letters left grooves in the paper beneath. I thought of the nights I sat beside him, correcting the slant of his cursive, telling him that words carried power when written with care. And now that same handwriting had condemned me. At 1:14 in the morning, a shadow crossed my door. A nurse paused, looked in, and then walked away. Perhaps she sensed the weight in that room, the way truth hung between us, heavier than the IV bag at my side. Lucas stirred then, lifting his head, his eyes swollen. He whispered, "You don't know what it's like, Mun. You don't know what it's like to be torn between two lives." His voice cracked, but I felt no pity. I answered softly, sharper than a knife. I carried two lives inside me once, mine and yours, and I never chose myself over you. His mouth opened, then closed. No words able to answer that truth. The silence gave me space to remember. March 2001, when he was 12, we lived in a cramped apartment near Bras. The roof leaked during storms, and I placed pots and buckets to catch the water while he slept. One night, lightning cut the power, and he woke crying, afraid of the thunder. I held him close, whispering that the storm would pass, that I would never let anything harm him. He believed me then, resting his head against my chest. And now, Years later, I realized he had taken that promise and twisted it. He believed harm could touch me if it meant shielding him. I asked him what he planned to do if I died here. Would he bury me quietly? A funeral no one asked too many questions about? Would he comfort himself with the lie that it had been fate? That my body was too weak to survive? Or would he dare admit, even to himself, that he had held the pen that carved my gravestone? His hands shook, his breathing shallow, but he said nothing. His silence was my answer. The minutes crawled into hours. At 2:37, I asked him about the child. He nodded, eyes red, whispering that she was 3 months along. I closed my eyes. 3 months. Around the time he began insisting I cut back on insulin. Around the time the late-night errands grew longer, the phone stayed hidden. I could trace the betrayal back to its seed, planted in secrecy, watered with lies, blooming into this poison flower. I imagined her in room 409A, clutching her belly, whispering to the life inside her, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that the warmth in her veins came from the coldness he poured into mine. Did she feel safer knowing I weakened so she could grow stronger? Did she think of me at all? My blood boiled, not just with anger, but with the clarity that love, when stolen, becomes theft twice over. Lucas finally broke. He dropped to his knees beside my bed, his forehead pressed to the metal railing, sobbing like the child he once was. He begged me to forgive him. He begged me to understand. He said he was desperate, that he couldn't lose her. Not after everything. I wanted to ask him, and what about losing me? But I already knew the answer. He had measured our lives and decided mine could bear the loss. I let him cry. I let the sound of his guilt fill the room. And while he wept, I thought of the years when tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. 1994, when the rent was overdue, and I held back sobs as I sold my grandmother's locket for 200 Rs. 2008, when the power was cut off and I sat in the dark, holding him close, swallowing my tears so he wouldn't feel the full weight of poverty. 2016, when I collapsed from exhaustion but told him it was just a dizzy spell, smiling through the spinning room. I had carried the burden of silence for decades, and now it was his turn. At 3:12, I spoke again. I told him that forgiveness was not a blanket he could pull over any sin. Forgiveness without change was only permission. He lifted his head, eyes wild, and said, "I'll change. I promise." But promises were just words, and I had lived long enough to know that words could heal or kill depending on the mouth they came from. His words had already killed something in me. The monitor beeped steadily, marking the fragile rhythm of my life. I realized then that my survival no longer depended only on medicine. It depended on my will, on whether I allowed myself to keep carrying his sins on my back. And for the first time, I considered letting go, not of life, but of him. Letting go of the boy I had raised, the man who betrayed me, the son who no longer knew how to love without taking. The night thinned into early morning, the first hints of dawn creeping through the blinds, painting the room in faint blue light. I looked at him, broken on the floor, and whispered, "I carried you once, Lucas, but I will not carry this." His sobs quieted, but he didn't move. And I knew then that something had shifted forever. The morning arrived gray, the kind of light that seeps reluctantly into a room, carrying no warmth, only exposure. The blinds rattled against the breeze from the air conditioner, and the hospital began to stir awake with the shuffle of carts and the clink of breakfast trays. I hadn't slept. My body ached, not just from the absence of proper medication, but from the weight of everything I had uncovered in those endless hours. Lucas sat slumped in the chair, eyes closed, his head tilted back against the wall. Even in sleep, or what passed for sleep, his brow furrowed, his fists clenched on his lap. Guilt is a restless pillow. I stared at him and felt the strangest mix of grief and clarity. The grief was obvious, the kind that hollowed out my chest and left me breathless. But the clarity cut deeper. For decades, I had built my life around protecting him, excusing him, elevating him above myself. And now, the truth stood clear in the sterile daylight. I had raised him to believe I was indestructible, and in believing that, He had convinced himself he could afford to gamble with my life. That was the cost of my sacrifices. They had taught him not gratitude, but entitlement. At 7:02, a nurse wheeled in a tray with lukewarm oatmeal, a banana, and black coffee. She avoided Lucas's eyes, but when she handed me the cup, her fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary, a small gesture of solidarity, as if she knew. The smell of the coffee filled the room, bitter and burnt, and I realized how much I had missed simple pleasures in the storm of betrayal. I sipped it slowly, the heat scalding my tongue, reminding me I was still alive. Lucas stirred then, blinking awake. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the boy I remembered flickered there. The boy who once ran through sprinklers in the summer of 1996, who laughed so loudly the neighbors leaned from their windows to watch. But the flicker died quickly, replaced by the shadow of the man who had stolen my treatment. He rubbed his face and whispered, "I'm sorry." Again. The words had become meaningless, worn thin like a coin passed through too many hands. I asked him if he had thought about the price. Not the price of her life, not the price of the child, but the price of mine. Did he imagine me collapsing in this bed? Did he picture the moment the monitor flatlined? Did he prepare himself for that silence? His mouth trembled, and he shook his head violently, whispering, "No, I knew you'd survive. You always survive." His conviction pierced me deeper than any scalpel. He truly believed my survival was inevitable, a given, something he could wager against. My strength had become his permission to betray me. The hours dragged, and I watched him pace the room, his hands pulling at his hair, his phone lighting up with her name again and again. Each time he silenced it, slipping it back into his pocket, ashamed. The name glowed against his thigh like a brand, reminding me of the woman who now carried the medicine meant for me. Camilla. I wondered if she was comfortable in her room, if she asked where the treatments came from, if she even cared. I wondered if she touched her belly lovingly, whispering to the life inside, oblivious, or perhaps fully aware, that her comfort was stitched from my suffering. At 10:47, the doctor returned. His eyes lingered on the chart, then on me. He spoke carefully, saying they had discovered irregularities in my treatment orders, that an internal review had been triggered. Lucas stiffened, his face draining of color. I said nothing. I watched the doctor, his expression a balance between duty and caution. He asked me directly, "Did you authorize these changes?" My throat tightened. Lucas's gaze burned into me, begging, pleading without words. For a long moment, I was silent. The truth balanced on my tongue like a blade. I remembered every impossible request Lucas had ever made, every time I had shielded him from consequences. The debts, the lies, the failures. And I remembered how each time I had told myself it was the last, but it never was. Here was the final request, unspoken but louder than any words. Protect me again. Lie for me again. Die for me quietly. I looked at the doctor and whispered, "No, I did not authorize it." The words hung in the air, sharp and irreversible. Lucas flinched as if struck. The doctor nodded slowly, scribbling on the chart. He said the hospital would investigate further, that my treatments would be reinstated immediately, and that steps would be taken to ensure my safety. Then he left, the click of the door echoing like a gavel. Lucas's eyes filled with panic. He hissed, "What have you done? They'll ruin me." His voice cracked with terror, but I felt no pity. I answered calmly, "They'll save me." That's the difference. For the first time, I felt the scales tilt back toward justice, even if only slightly. The hours that followed were tense. Lucas paced like a caged animal, muttering about consequences, about shame, about how everything would fall apart. I let him speak. His words washed over me, meaningless, the noise of a man who still believed his ruin mattered more than my survival. I turned my face toward the window and let the sunlight warm my skin. It was weak, filtered through dirty blinds, but it was mine. In that fragile warmth, I realized something that both hurt and healed. Love is not proven by sacrifice alone. Love is proven by choice. And he had chosen her over me, not once, but over and over in lies. in signatures, in whispered pleas. That choice was his truth, and my truth was this. I no longer had to carry him. The investigation moved quietly through the hospital halls like a current beneath the surface. I could feel it in the way nurses glanced at me, in the clipped conversations behind closed doors, in the sudden politeness of staff who avoided eye contact with Lucas. He grew restless, agitated, his phone vibrating with constant messages he refused to answer in my presence. Camilla's name glowed on that screen like a wound, and each time he silenced it, I felt both relief and anger. Relief that he was at least ashamed, anger that the shame had arrived too late. By noon, my medications had been reinstated. I felt the sharp sting of the insulin needle in my thigh, the cool rush of saline through the IV, the familiar burn of beta blockers settling into my veins. Each sensation reminded me that survival was not just an abstract idea. It was chemicals. It was science. It was care. And he had stolen it from me. The thought alone made me grip the rail of the bed until my knuckles whitened. Lucas sat in the corner, his leg bouncing, his hands rubbing together as though he could wash off guilt that clung like oil. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice cracking. "You don't understand, mine. I was drowning. She saved me. She gave me something you couldn't." His words sliced deeper than any scalpel. Something I couldn't. After decades of giving, after bleeding myself dry for him, he still believed I had fallen short. I asked him what that was. What could she possibly give that outweighed the years of sacrifice, the roof over his head, the food on his plate, the education bought with my blistered hands? He met my eyes and whispered, "She gave me a future." The cruelty of it took my breath away. A future, as though I had never been his future. As though I hadn't built every brick of his present with my own suffering. I thought of 1999, when I skipped meals so he could attend a school trip. Of 2004, when I pawned my earrings to buy him a suit for his graduation. Of 2012, when I worked nights in a cold office so he could afford textbooks. Every moment I had believed I was securing his future. And now he handed it over to her, as if mine was expired, disposable. The nurse entered, checking my vitals, her eyes darting between us. Lucas forced a smile, the same smile he had used all his life to mask lies. But I saw through it. When she left, I turned to him and said quietly, "I was your future once." He flinched, but he didn't answer. His silence confirmed what I already knew. My time as his anchor had ended, replaced by her. At 2:15, the doctor returned, his tone firmer this time. He explained that the hospital's legal team had been notified, that protocols had been breached, and that there could be consequences. Lucas shifted in his chair, pale, his jaw tight. He muttered under his breath that they were exaggerating, that it wasn't criminal, just a mistake. But I knew better. It was theft. It was endangerment. It was betrayal with a pen. The doctor asked if I wished to pursue charges. Lucas's eyes widened, panic spilling out of him. He whispered, Please, please don't." His voice was desperate, the same tone he used when he was 10 and begged me not to tell his father he had broken a window. But this wasn't glass. This was blood. I told the doctor I needed time. He nodded, respecting the gravity of the decision, and left us again in silence. Lucas collapsed forward, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He repeated the same refrain over and over. "I did it for love. I did it for love." The words rang hollow, echoing off the sterile walls. I wanted to shout at him that love is not proven by betrayal, that love does not demand blood from the person who gave you life. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy as lead. Instead, I thought back to January 2007, when he came home late, trembling, confessing he had crashed his motorbike. I had scolded him, cleaned his wounds, paid for the repairs with money meant for rent. That night I told him, love means responsibility. He had nodded then, promising to be better. Yet here we were, years later, and he still hadn't learned. Love without responsibility is not love. It's selfishness wearing a mask. At 4:30, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the blinds. Lucas rose suddenly, pacing the room like a man trapped in a cage. He said he couldn't lose her. Not again. His voice broke as he admitted that Camilla had miscarried once before, last year, and that the grief had nearly destroyed him. He said he had sworn never to let it happen again, no matter the cost. I listened, my stomach twisting. There it was, the justification he had carried all along. My life weighed against her pregnancy, and he had tipped the scale without hesitation. I whispered, "And what if I had died, Lucas? Would that have been a cost you could bear?" His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. He had considered it. He had accepted it. He had gambled on my death as collateral for her life. The rage in me simmered, but alongside it grew something else. Resolve. For too long, I had let his excuses cover his sins, let his tears wash away his accountability. But this was different. This was final. He had crossed a line that could not be erased with apologies. As evening settled, I stared at him, the boy I had carried, the man I no longer recognized, and I felt something inside me shift permanently. I had loved him with everything I had, and in return he had asked me to die quietly for his comfort. That was not love. That was consumption. And I would not let myself be consumed any longer. Night fell again, and the hospital took on that strange duality it always carried after sunset. Half sanctuary, half prison. The hallways glowed with dim yellow light, the hum of machines blending with the faint cries of patients behind closed doors. I lay awake, my body aching less now that the treatments had resumed, but my heart heavier than ever. Lucas paced the room like a ghost haunting his own mistakes, his phone buzzing every few minutes with Camilla's name. He didn't answer. Maybe he was afraid of my eyes on him, or maybe he was afraid of hers. I watched him, really watched him, and I saw the boy I had once known buried under the man he had become. His shoulders hunched as if carrying invisible weights, his lips chewed raw from nerves, his hands restless. He was unraveling, but the unraveling wasn't enough, not compared to what he had done. At 8:42, he finally broke the silence. He whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." His voice was thin, fragile, like paper tearing. I answered calmly, "You can't. Some things are not meant to be fixed. They're meant to be faced." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time I saw fear. Not fear of the hospital, not fear of Camilla, but fear of losing me. And I realized that was his true weakness. He had gambled on my survival because he couldn't bear the idea of my absence, yet he had no problem putting me at risk. Love twisted into selfishness, devotion into control. I thought of the winter of 2019 when he had lost his job. He had sat at the kitchen table staring at the bills, whispering, "I can't do this." I had placed my hand over his and said, "You're not alone. I'll carry it with you." And I did. I worked extra hours, stretched meals thinner, took on debts in my own name. And yet, here we were, years later, and he had turned those same words into chains for me. He had expected me to carry it all, again, even if it killed me. The doctor entered at 9:15, his tone more direct now. He explained that an official report had been filed, that hospital administrators were aware, and that external authorities might become involved. Lucas stiffened, his face draining of color. He tried to speak, but the doctor cut him off gently, saying, "This is no longer just about family. This is about ethics, about law." Lucas turned to me then, eyes wild, pleading, "Mai, please, don't let them." His desperation filled the room, but I sat in silence. For once, I let the weight of his choices rest on his shoulders instead of mine. When the doctor left, Lucas fell into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I whispered, softly but clearly, "You stole my life to give it to her. Do you even see that?" His voice cracked as he said, "I only wanted to save her. I only wanted to save my child." My chest tightened at the word child. He had forgotten, or chosen to forget, that I had once said the same words about him. I only wanted to save my child. That had been my prayer for decades, and this was how it ended. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded in. 1993, when he had pneumonia, and I sat awake for 3 nights straight, counting his breaths, terrified they would stop. 2005, when he was bullied in school, and I marched into the principal's office, demanding protection. 2011, when he almost failed a course, and I hired a tutor I couldn't afford. Every time I had fought for him. Every time I had given more than I had. And now, when it was my turn to be weak, he had chosen someone else. The truth settled on me like a stone. I had loved him more than myself, and he had learned to love himself more than me. That was the imbalance, the lesson I had taught without meaning to. He had taken my sacrifices as proof that I was unbreakable, and in doing so, he had broken me. At 10:30, the nurse returned to check my vitals. Lucas snapped at her, his nerves unraveling, his words sharp. She raised an eyebrow, unamused, then looked at me with a quiet question in her eyes. "Are you safe?" I wanted to answer, but my throat tightened. I managed a faint nod, but the truth echoed inside me. I was not safe, not from him, not from the weight of his choices. Lucas stormed out at 11:02, muttering that he needed air. The silence he left behind was heavier than his presence. I listened to the hallway noises, the clatter of carts, the murmur of distant voices, and I realized I felt calmer without him there. For the first time in days, I could breathe without his shadow over me. I thought about what the doctor had said, that this was no longer just about family. He was right. Family had been the excuse, the shield I had used to justify everything. But love twisted into betrayal is not family. Blood does not sanctify cruelty. If anything, it deepens the wound. When Lucas returned past midnight, his eyes were red, his face pale. He sat by the bed, took my hand without asking, and whispered, "I can't lose you, Mon. Not you. Not her. Not the baby." I wanted to pull my hand away, but I didn't. I let him hold it, because in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the one he was holding on to. He was holding on to the image of me, the version of me who would always forgive, always protect, always save him. But that woman was gone. She had died the moment I saw her name on the clipboard. I turned my head toward him and whispered, "You already lost me." His grip tightened, his breath caught, and I knew the words had pierced him deeper than any punishment the hospital could deliver. The following day, the air in the hospital shifted. It was no longer just the sterile smell of disinfectant and plastic gloves. It carried tension, like electricity before a storm. Nurses moved with sharper precision, their eyes avoiding Lucas more openly now. The whispers in the hall no longer hushed when we passed. Something had been set in motion, and no matter how much he begged me with his eyes, it couldn't be stopped. I felt stronger physically. The medications steadying my body, restoring rhythms that had faltered in the days before. But strength in the body did not mean peace in the heart. My chest still ached, not from illness, but from betrayal. Each beat of my heart carried 2 truths at once. I was alive, and he had tried to steal that life. At 9:20 in the morning, the hospital administrator came into the room, a tall woman with clipped speech and eyes that missed nothing. She spoke formally, explaining that there would be an inquiry, that Lucas's actions could be considered fraud, endangerment, even attempted harm. Each word struck him like a blow. He leaned forward in his chair, sweating, pleading with her, saying it was a misunderstanding, a mistake of paperwork. But her eyes flicked to me, sharp and searching. I held her gaze. I said clearly, "It was no mistake. His hand was the one that signed." Her nod was small but final, and in that moment I knew the story had left our walls. It now belonged to the world outside. Lucas collapsed back into his chair, pale and trembling. He whispered, "Mai, you don't know what you've done." I turned my head toward him slowly and said, "No, Lucas. I finally know exactly what I've done. For once in my life, I chose myself." The words hung in the air, unfamiliar and heavy, but they tasted of truth. The hours that followed were thick with silence. He tried to speak, to explain again, but his words had become repetitions of the same song. "She needed me. The baby needed me. I thought you would survive." Every sentence was a mirror reflecting his selfishness back at him. I stopped answering. I let him talk to the walls, to the hum of the machines, to the emptiness between us. Around noon, I closed my eyes and let memories rise, uninvited but insistent. I saw the small apartment in 1991 where I washed his baby clothes in a bucket because we couldn't afford a machine. I saw the street market where I bargained over fruit to save 5 reais. I saw the night in 2013 when I sat by his side as he studied, nodding off over textbooks, while I stitched clothes until my fingers bled. Each memory carried pride once, but now they were weights, proof of how far I had carried him only to be abandoned at the summit. When I opened my eyes again, I saw him staring at me, his eyes bloodshot. He whispered, "Do you hate me?" The question startled me, not because I hadn't considered it, but because hate felt too small for what I felt. Hate is sharp, it burns, and then it fades. What I felt was heavier, a grief that did not fade, a hollowing of something sacred. I whispered back, "I don't hate you, Lucas. I mourn you, because the boy I raised is gone." His lips parted, his body flinched, but no words came. That silence was louder than any scream. At 2:45, a nurse entered to change my IV bag. Lucas tried to help, reaching to steady the pole, but she brushed his hand away firmly, her eyes cold. He looked wounded, and for the first time, I didn't move to soothe him. I let him sit with the sting of rejection, the smallest taste of what he had fed me. The afternoon dragged into evening. The blinds filtered in a soft orange glow, the city outside roaring with traffic, with lives that carried on indifferent to mine. I thought of Camilla then, of her belly swelling with life that wasn't mine to claim. I wondered if she knew what had been stolen for her, if she would ever understand the cost. Maybe one day that child would be told stories of sacrifice, of a father's desperate love. Maybe my name would never be spoken in those stories. Maybe I would vanish from their version of history, erased like a footnote too inconvenient to keep. The thought didn't break me the way I expected. Instead, it clarified something deep inside me. I didn't need their acknowledgement to exist. My story was carved in every scar on my hands, every sleepless night, every sacrifice made in silence. They could try to erase me, but the truth was already written in the life I had lived. At 7:18, Lucas tried one last time. He came to my bedside, kneeling, tears running freely. He clutched my hand, pressing it to his face, whispering, "Please, Mai, don't let them take everything from me." His tears were warm against my skin, but my hand remained limp in his. I whispered, "They are not taking it, Lucas. You gave it away." His sobs deepened, shaking his body, but I felt strangely calm. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lifting, not because he had changed, but because I had stopped carrying him. That night, as the city outside dimmed into darkness, I lay in bed and listened to the steady rhythm of the monitor. Beep, beep. Each sound a reminder. I was still here. Against his choices, against his betrayal, against his gamble, I was still alive. And for the first time, I wanted to live not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. The final night I spent in that hospital felt unlike the others. The hum of machines no longer sounded like threats, but like guardians, keeping watch over a body that had been betrayed yet endured. The sterile white walls, the clatter of carts in the distance, even the faint cries from other rooms, they all seemed muted compared to the storm that had raged inside me for days. Something had shifted, quiet but undeniable. I was no longer the same woman who had arrived here believing love meant sacrifice without end. Lucas sat in the corner, smaller than I had ever seen him. His eyes were swollen from days of tears, his shoulders sagged with exhaustion, his hands wrung together as though he could twist his guilt into something smaller. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to comfort him. I didn't rush to close the distance, to soothe his shame, to make his world easier. Instead, I let him sit with the weight of what he had done. It was his to carry, not mine. The administrator returned in the morning with papers, her voice steady as she explained that further investigations would proceed. Legal consequences might follow. Disciplinary actions would be certain. Lucas tried to interrupt, tried to insist again that it was all a misunderstanding, but I raised my hand and silenced him. My voice was calm, firmer than I ever remembered it being. I told her the truth again. I had not authorized anything. I had been stripped of care, and my son had placed another's name above mine. Speaking it aloud once more felt like placing stones on a grave, not of my life, but of the illusions I had carried for so long. When she left, Lucas turned to me, desperation etched across his face. He whispered, "You've destroyed me, Mun." My lips parted, and for the first time I felt no fear in speaking the truth. "No, Lucas. You destroyed yourself." My words cut through the sterile air, leaving nothing but silence between us. His eyes widened, searching my face for softness, for forgiveness, for the mother who had always picked up the pieces. But she was gone. In her place stood a woman who had finally learned that love cannot mean erasure. The hours stretched, and I found myself remembering the smaller moments, the ones that had made up the mosaic of motherhood. His first steps in 1990, when he toddled across a kitchen floor stained with bleach. His laughter in 1999, chasing pigeons through Praça da Sé. His trembling voice in 2008, when he called me crying from a payphone, saying he had failed an exam. Each memory shimmered like glass. Beautiful once, but sharp to the touch now. I would always love those moments, but I no longer mistook them for protection against his betrayal. Love for the boy he was didn't excuse the man he had become. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the nurse came with my final discharge instructions. My medications were restored, my charts corrected, and I was scheduled to leave the following morning. Relief should have washed over me, but instead it was something heavier, steadier. Freedom. Not freedom from the hospital, but from the illusion that my life's worth was tied to his choices. Lucas begged me one last time. He dropped to his knees, clutching my hand, sobbing, "I can't do this without you. You're all I have." The irony struck me cruelly. I had been all he had, and still he had risked me for someone else. I pulled my hand away gently, my voice soft but resolute. "You will learn to, because I will not carry this anymore." His body shook with sobs, but I didn't bend. For the first time, I allowed the distance to remain, allowed him to feel the emptiness he had carved between us. That night, alone in the quiet room, I looked out the window at the city lights flickering against the dark sky. São Paulo stretched endlessly, alive with millions of stories, and mine was only one among them. Yet for the first time, I wanted my story to belong to me, not to him, not to the son I raised, not to the sacrifices I made, not to the betrayals I endured. To me. I thought about the decades I had lived bending under the weight of impossible requests, always saying yes, always absorbing pain so he wouldn't feel it. And now I saw the truth as clearly as the stars faintly visible above the city glow. Love is not measured by how much you can lose for someone else. Real love is measured by how much you can remain yourself while giving. I had lost myself too many times in his shadow, but I would not lose myself again. When the dawn came and the nurse wheeled me toward the exit, I felt lighter. My body was still fragile, my steps unsteady, but my spirit was different. Lucas walked beside me, silent, his head bowed. Camilla never came. The space between us felt like an ocean, but I didn't try to bridge it. Some distances are necessary. Some distances are survival. As I crossed the threshold of the hospital doors, the morning sun hit my face. Warmth spread through me, fragile but real. I was still here. Against all odds, against his choices, against the weight of betrayal, I was still alive, and I would live not as a mother defined by sacrifice, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself. I whispered into the light, not for him, not for her, not for anyone else, only for me. I survived, and this time I would survive for myself.